The Gambler by Fyodor Dostoevsky. Retold by Catherine Sklerova. Chapter 2. I confess I didn't like it. I decided to play, but I didn't wish to do so on behalf of someone else. I entered the gaming rooms with an angry feeling in my heart. Everything there irritated me. In general, journalists write about three subjects regarding the gaming rooms: the splendor of the place, the luxury of the salons, and the heaps of gold lying on the tables. Those journalists are all wrong. There is nothing splendid about the gaming rooms, and there are no heaps of gold lying on the tables. To tell the truth, there is very little money to be seen at all. Of course, some madman, generally an Englishman or an Asiatic, may win a great deal or lose everything. As for the rest of the crowd, they play for gulden and seldom win much money. That day I entered the gaming room for the first time in my life. I felt confused for a moment. The crowd oppressed me. I could feel my heart beginning to beat quickly. Also, I had made up my mind that I would never leave Roulette until some radical change happened in my life. Thus, it must be or would be. However, I was expecting to win something at roulette. Is gambling the worst method of acquiring money? Is it worse than trade? Out of 100 people, only one can win anyway. I decided to do nothing serious at first. I simply watched the game and tried to learn it. I knew nothing of its rules and had never seen it before. Everything about it seemed morally dirty and mean. Many men crowded around the gambling tables, watching the game with greedy eyes. I see nothing dirty and I wish to win quickly. I have always applauded to the opinion of a certain moralist who replied to the excuse that one may always gamble moderately by saying that to do so making things worse, since in that case the profits too will always be moderate. Small and large profits are not the same. No, it is all matter of proportion. What may seem a small sum to a rich person is a large sum to me. Well, I had a strong desire to win at the time. As to the question whether stakes and not winnings are immoral is another question altogether. I do not want to express my opinion about it. Well, why should I deceive myself? I could see that the whole thing was a useless pursuit. All these people watched the game with great seriousness and respect. In my opinion, there are two sorts of the game of the gentleman and the game of the herd. Here, as I said, I draw sharp distinctions. And yet, how stupid my distinctions may seem to others. For instance, a rich gentleman may stake 50 or 100 francs at the beginning, then he may stake 1,000 francs, but he must do it simply for the love of the game itself, simply to see the process of winning and losing. If he wins, he will laugh perhaps or say a short remark. Then he may double his stake in order to watch the play of chances, and not because he wants to win. In a word, he looks at the roulette and at the gaming tables as mere relaxation and entertainment. He looks at the excited crowd beside him indifferently. He doesn't think alike because he has enough money to lose without regret. He plays for pleasure and not for money. I think this complete ignorance of realities is truly aristocratic. For example, I have seen even mothers giving gold coins to their elegant daughters, misses of 15 or 16. They wanted to teach them how to play. Usually the young ladies may have won or have lost. They have laughed and departed as though they were well pleased. In the same way, I saw our general once approach the table in an important manner. A waiter offered him a chair, but the general didn't even notice him. Slowly he took out his money bags and took out 30 francs in gold. He staked his money on the black and won. Yet he didn't take up his winnings. He left them there on the table. Again the black turned up, and again he didn't gather in what he had won. On the third round, the red turned up, and he had lost 1,200 francs. Yet even there he rose with a smile. He didn't show his disappointment. On the other hand, I saw a Frenchman first win and then lose 30,000 francs without a murmur. He would never give a thought to his lost money. This is how aristocrats act in the gaming rooms. However, I had come here not only to watch the game, but also join this distinguished crowd near the gaming tables. As for my moral views, I have no room for them among my practical opinions. I am writing only to relieve my conscience. Yet let me say only this, that from the first I felt an intense disgust to any trial of my acts and thoughts by a moral standard. Another standard altogether has directed my life. As a matter of fact, the crowd was playing in a very dirty fashion. A real robbery was going on around that gaming table. The croupiers who sat at the two ends of it hadn't only to watch the stakes, but only to calculate the game. A huge amount of work for two men. As for the crowd itself, it consisted mostly of Frenchmen. Yet I was not taking notes in order to be able to give you a description of roulette, but in order to understand how to behave and I myself should begin to play. For example, I noticed that nothing was less usual than for another's hand to stretch out and take one's winnings whenever one had won. Then one would cry loudly, "I want you to prove and pronounce a witness to the fact that the stake is yours." At first, the game was absolute nonsense to me. I could only distinguish that stakes were made on numbers and on colors. I took out Polina's 100 gulden out of my pocket. The thought I was not going to play for myself quite upset me. It was an unpleasant feeling. I tried not to think of it. However, I had a feeling that I could destroy my own fortunes. Also, I wonder if anyone has approached the gaming table without thinking of superstition. I pulled out 50 gulden and staked it on even. The wheel spun and stopped at 13. I had lost. I staked another 50 gulden, this time on the red. The red turned up. For my next play, I staked 100 gulden on the red, and again the red turned up. I took my 400 gulden and placed them on 12, and I won. Thus, from 100 gulden, my money had grown to 800. Once more I staked the whole 800 gulden on the even, and I was paid another 800 gulden. I took my 1,600 gulden and left in search of Polina Alexandrovna. I could talk to her only after supper. This time the Frenchman was absent, and the general seemed to be in a better mood. When he saw me, he said that he would be sorry to see me playing at the gaming tables. In his opinion, such behavior would greatly upset him. I nodded without saying a word. "Of course, I have no right to order your actions, but you yourself agree that," he began. As usual, he didn't finish his sentence. I answered that I possessed very little money to play roulette. At last he went away silently. I went to Polina's room. I handed Polina her winnings and told her that I would not play for her anymore. "Why not?" she asked excitedly. "Because I want to play for myself," I replied with astonishment. "This is my single reason that is true." "Then you are so certain that your roulette playing will get us out of difficulties?" she asked with a smile. "Yes," I said. "Perhaps my certainty about winning may seem to you ridiculous. Please, leave me in peace." Nevertheless, she offered me 800 gulden from her winnings. I shook my head. "I refuse to take your money. I will not play on behalf of anyone because in all probability I should lose." "It is absurd," she said. "You must play as my partner or equal shares. I know you will do as I wish." She went away without listening to my further protests. The next day she said not a word to me about gambling. She purposely avoided me. When she met me, she talked to me with coolness and dislike. I could see that plainly. Also, she didn't trouble to hide the fact that I was necessary to her. We had a rather incomprehensible relationship between us. She was very proud and selfish. For example, although she knew that I was madly in love with her, she allowed me to speak to her of my love. My feelings of her were nothing to Polina. She little cared for what I said to her and for what I felt for her. She didn't trouble about my feelings at all. She spoke about her affairs with a complete frankness, as though I were a slave or passing acquaintance. Her frankness pained me very much. After 3 weeks, I learned that she wished to play roulette. She told me that she wanted me to play on her behalf because it was indecent for her to play in person. From the tone of her voice, I had understood that there was something else on her mind besides a desire to win money. As if money could matter at all to her, I could not refuse her order as I loved her madly. She held me in slavery, and I figured in her eyes as a mere nonentity. This is how matters stood. I asked her many questions and she never returned to me a single answer. The next day there was a good deal of talk about a telegram which had been sent to St. Petersburg, but to which there had come no answer. The general was visibly worried and disturbed. The telegram concerned his sick mother. After dinner the whole party talked about the telegram for a long time. The Frenchman behaved rudely. His behavior reminded me of a proverb. "Invite a man to your table, and soon he will place his feet on your table." I knew of the circumstances which bound the general to him. The Frenchman had given him 30,000 rubles for some secret business. I had no idea what that secret business was. Thus the general was indebted to the Frenchman. Anyway, the main part in the affair was played by Mademoiselle Blanche. I had no doubt about this. But who was this Mademoiselle Blanche? I had heard that she was a noble Frenchwoman. She possessed a colossal property. She lived with her mother. The Frenchman and Mademoiselle were good friends. They were much wealthier than the general and his family. Perhaps they thought that our means were too modest for them. Also, for the last 3 days I noticed certain looks which Mr. Astley was throwing at Mademoiselle Blanche and her mother. It occurred to me that he must have had some previous acquaintance with them. I had even assumed that the Frenchman too must have met Mr. Astley before. At all events, the Frenchman talked to him very seldom. He scarcely even looked at him. Certainly he didn't seem to be afraid of him. But why did Mademoiselle Blanche also never look at Mr. Astley? I was very confused. I wanted to find answers to many questions. The general seemed very uneasy. He was waiting for a telegram to announce the death of his mother impatiently. What a rich man he would become afterwards. But now he was in despair. To fall in love at 55 is a misfortune. Mademoiselle Blanche would never marry him without his mother's property and money. At present moment he was a widowed man with his children, ruined property, and many debts. Mademoiselle Blanche was very beautiful. She was tall and slender, with black hair and eyes. She was about 25 years old. She always had a proud glance. Her dresses were always expensive and attractive. Her feet and hands were astonishing. Sometimes, when she laughed, she showed her white teeth, but most often her behavior was serious, especially in the presence of Polina and Marina Fifilovna. Yet she seemed to be a person without an education or personal opinion. She was cunning and selfish. I observed her during previous 2 weeks and saw no sympathy on hers towards the general. Everything depended on the heritage from the general's mother. If his mother was not dead, Mademoiselle Blanche would disappear at once. How I hated it all. I would leave the general and his friends with great pleasure, but I could not leave Polina. How, then, could I show contempt for those who surrounded her? Espionage is a base thing, but what I have to do with that? Mr. Astley was a curious person. I was sure that he was in love with Polina. What a dreadful circumstance, though he was too shy to express his love with a single word or look. He never joined our walks in the park, though I knew he wanted to join us very much. He always refused our invitation to have a walk together, yet he never lost any chance of speaking to me. Once he asked me whether Polina Alexandrovna liked flowers or not. I really cannot say, I replied. What, you cannot say? He asked me in surprise. No, I have never noticed whether she does or not. Finally, with a nod, he walked away with a sad expression on his face. By the way, we talked in French. Today has been a stupid day. The time is now 11 o'clock. In the evening, and I am sitting in my room and thinking. It all began this morning. Polina forced me to go and play roulette for her again. When she handed me her money, I told her my conditions. First, that I would not take half from her winnings. Second, that she would explain to me why it was so necessary for her to win and how much money she needed. I stated my conditions because I could not believe that she was doing all this merely for the sake of money. Yet clearly she needed money, and that as soon as possible, and for special purpose. Well, she promised to explain everything and departed. I went to the casino thoughtfully. There was a huge crowd in the gambling rooms. What a greedy crowd it was. I took my seat at a table and began to watch the game carefully. I observed and took notes. It seemed to me that the calculation was useless. Many players sat with ruled papers in their hands. They calculated the chances, staked, and lost exactly as we more simple immortals did who played without any reckoning at all. I noticed some order in the game. This, of course, is a very strange thing. For example, the ball stopped at the middle figures and then on the outer figures. Then, after another couple of rounds, the ball would stop at the first figures and then return to the middle figures. This repeated every 2 hours. It was all very curious. The same happened to colors. The red would alternate with the black almost without any order. 2 rounds would end on either the red or the black. Then the colors would turn up without order for a long time. Mr. Astley, who stood by the gaming table the whole morning, also told me of the circumstances, yet never once staked in person. I began to play carefully. Despite my attention, I had lost all the money quickly. To begin with, I staked 200 gulden on even and won. Then I staked the same amount again and won. I did so 3 times. At the moment, I had won 4,000 gulden. That was a proper time for me to depart, but a stranger feeling arose in me. I wanted to challenge fate. I staked 4,000 gulden on even and lost. I rose from the table and slowly. I felt stupefied. I decided to tell Polina of my losses after lunch. At lunch I was very excited. Mademoiselle Blanche and the Frenchman were lunching with us. It seemed to me that the Frenchman had been to casino that morning and had seen my failure there. So now he showed me more attention while talking to me. Then he approached me and asked if it had been my own money that I had lost. He appeared to be suspicious. I immediately answered that the money had been all my own. At this, the general seemed extremely surprised. He asked me whence I had got it. I replied that I had begun only with 100 gulden. 6 or 7 rounds had increased my capital to 600 gulden. Then I told him that I had lost all my money in 2 rounds. My answer was true enough. During my speech, I looked at Polina, but I saw nothing on her face. The general said nothing, yet I could see some annoyance on his face. Perhaps his current circumstances made it hard for him to hear money passing through the hands of an irresponsible fool like myself within half an hour. Then the Frenchman turned to me and said, "A man should go more carefully. I noticed that many Russians go in for gambling. They like it, but they are no good at the game." "I think that roulette was created especially for Russians," I said. "I'm sure I'm right. Speaking of Russians as gamblers, I would rather blame them than praise them. I'm quite sure of that." "On what do you base on your opinion?" he asked. "We Russians always need money," I replied. "We like roulette very much because in a couple of hours one may grow rich without doing any work. This method is a big attraction for us, but since we play it in a careless fashion and without making any effort, we almost always lose." "That is true," said the Frenchman. "That is not true," said the general. "And you," he said to me, "you should be ashamed of yourself for traducing your own people." "I beg pardon, which is the worst of the two, Russian carelessness or the German method of growing rich through honest work?" "What a Russian idea," cried the Frenchman. I smiled. I was glad to have a quarrel with them. "I would rather live a wandering life in tents than grow slowly rich with endless work," I said. "I will never need to a German idol." I had not been in this country very long ago. Anyway, I have noticed many things about Germans. Things are just as we read of them in good German picture books. Every house has its father, who is very honorable. He is so honorable that it is dreadful to have anything to do with him. I do not like such people. Each such father has his family, and every evening they read books aloud. All is beautifully poetic and touching. Do not be angry, General. Let me tell you something that is even more touching than that. I remember very well how my own father, now dead, used to read books aloud to myself and my mother. However, every German family is bound to submission to its father. They work hard to increase their capital. Such father can give some amount of golden guldens to his elder son, in order that his son may get an education or buy a small plot of land. But such father will not give his money to his daughter. Her only chance is to marry well. Such father may sell his younger son into the ranks of the army in order that he may earn more money for his capital. Yes, I have seen such things done. What more have I to tell? Well, I can add something about the elder son. Perhaps he has his Gretchen, whom he loves so dearly, but he cannot marry her, for the reason that he has not yet collected enough money. So the pair wait for a long time. Gretchen's beauty and love fade more and more, until at last, after some 20 years, a sufficient amount of money has been collected honorably. Then the father blesses his 45-year-old son and the 35-year-old Gretchen. In turn, the elder son becomes an honorable father, and the old story begins again. At 50 or 60, the elder son will inherit a considerable sum from his father. That sum he will hand over to his son, and the latter to his son, and so on for several generations, until at last there will be a hope and company, or the devil knows that. Is it not a beautiful spectacle? The spectacle of a century of the inherited work, patience, and sacrifice. What is more, they think there can never be anything better in this. They begin to judge the rest of the world. They judge everyone who is not exactly like themselves. Yes, you heard this story in a nutshell. As for me, I would rather grow fat after the Russian manner or lose all my money at roulette. I have no wish to be hope and company at the end of 5 generations. I want my money for myself. I may be wrong, but there you have it. Those are my views. How far off you may be in what you have said I do not know, said the general. As usual, he left the sentence unfinished. Actually, whenever he faced anything that was beyond the limits of daily small talk, he left unfinished what he was saying. The Frenchman had listened to me attentively, but he could not understand much of what I was saying. As for Polina, she looked absolutely indifferent to me and my speech. She seemed not to hear anything at all. At all events, Polina promised to give me an explanation that day. I waited for that moment impatiently.